The wind cut through the rocky valleys like a sharp blade, carrying dust that stung every inch of Jake's exposed skin. He adjusted the straps of his worn survival pack, grimacing as he scanned the barren landscape. His ship had been badly damaged in the storm the previous day, leaving him stranded on this unforgiving planet. Every step was a challenge. Every breath carried the metallic tang of dust and fear. He had food, but not much, and water was even scarcer. He knew he needed shelter, or the cold nights would finish what the storm had begun. As he moved carefully between jagged boulders, he caught a glimpse of something unusual in the distance. A faint shimmer, almost like heat waves but irregular. Curious and cautious, he approached. Peering over a rock, he saw it. A small cluster of figures, barely visible, crouched near a shallow stream. At first, he thought they were animals. Then he saw the movement, the way one of them held a smaller figure close, and his heart tightened. The figures were humanoid but not human. Their skin had a subtle glow, pale in the shadows but shimmering faintly in the sunlight. Their eyes were large and dark, reflecting the harsh light in a way that made them look almost fragile. The smaller one, likely a child, shivered violently, and the taller figure, an adult female, covered it protectively with trembling hands. She looked up, sensing his gaze, and for a moment their eyes met. Jake froze. There was hunger there, exhaustion, fear. He could feel it without words. His stomach tightened. He had been alone for days, struggling himself, but the sight of her suffering sparked something deep inside him. Compassion, humanity. He reached slowly into his pack, pulling out a small ration bar. It was barely enough for him, but he could not walk away. He stepped out cautiously, raising his hands in a universal gesture of peace. The female's large eyes widened, and she pulled the child closer, backing away slightly. Jake smiled gently. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly, his voice steady despite his own fear. "I have food if you want it." She didn't respond. Her lips trembled and she looked at the ration bar, then at the child, then back at him. Slowly, almost hesitantly, she reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of the wrapper. Jake handed it over, careful not to make sudden movements. She took it, unwrapped it, and offered a small piece to the child. The child's tiny hands fumbled, the piece slipping almost immediately, but Jake bent down and guided them. "Here, take it." Slowly. The first bite made her pause. She closed her eyes, and for a moment Jake thought she might reject it. Then she shivered, a quiet sound escaping her throat, half sob, half relief. Her hands shook as she held the remaining pieces, breaking them into tiny bits for the child. The child ate eagerly, tears streaking the glowing cheeks. And then it happened. The alien mother, exhausted, malnourished, and overwhelmed, began to cry. Quietly at first, then louder, until she was sobbing openly, pressing her face to the child's small head. Jake watched, unsure what to do, but he did not move. He knew this was not a moment to interrupt. This was a release she had been holding inside for days, maybe weeks. I didn't know if anyone would come," she whispered, though he couldn't understand the words fully. Her voice carried the accent of her kind, musical and soft, yet breaking under the weight of hunger and fear. She looked at him again, tears streaking the faint luminescence of her face. "Thank you," Jake nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "It's okay, you're safe now." "I'll help you." The mother Lyra, he later learned, led him to a small hollow near the rocks. It was barely a shelter, a small overhang that protected from wind and dust, but it was enough for now. He set down his pack, offering what little water he had. She drank greedily, then held out her hands, almost pleading, as if she could not believe such kindness existed. The child, curled in her arms, stared up at Jake with wide, trusting eyes. Night came quickly on this planet, colder and darker than Jake had anticipated. He helped them settle, using his emergency blanket to wrap them both, the small child squirming against the tight cocoon. Lyra watched him with a mixture of suspicion and gratitude. It was clear she was not accustomed to receiving help. On her world, trust was earned, not given freely. Over the next few hours, Jake learned more. Using gestures, broken words, and small drawings in the dust, Lyra communicated her story. Raiders had attacked their settlement days ago, stealing food and supplies. Many of her people had been captured or killed. She had fled with her child, surviving on scraps, avoiding detection. She had not eaten properly in days, and she had almost given up hope. Jake listened quietly, offering what comfort he could. His own stomach ached, but the sight of her resilience and desperation kept him from thinking about himself. Instead, he focused on solutions. There were edible plants nearby, some sources of water, and he could repair his emergency stove to cook small meals. But most importantly, he realized that survival here would require trust. Trust between him and Lyra, trust between human and alien. As he prepared a small portion of his ration bar for the night, Lyra studied him. Her large eyes reflected the firelight of his portable stove, and she seemed to weigh something, perhaps the value of this unexpected encounter. Then she nodded slightly, a gesture of understanding. She did not speak, but the gesture was enough. It was a start. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by the alien cries of distant creatures. The night was alive with sounds that made Jake uneasy, but he focused on the small victory. Lyra and her child were fed, warm, and safe for the moment. He knew this was only the beginning. The planet was unforgiving and the future uncertain. But for the first time since his crash, he felt a spark of hope. Morning brought more challenges. The harsh sun illuminated the rocky landscape, revealing dangers hidden in the shadows. Jake ventured cautiously, collecting edible plants, searching for fresh water and scouting possible threats. Lyra followed closely, her movements careful, yet steady. Despite her weakened state, there was a determination in her posture, a fierce protective instinct for her child that reminded Jake of the strength inherent in all mothers, human or alien. At one point, they discovered a small alien creature trapped in a pit. Its body was thin, wings weak, and it squeaked in pain. Lyra gasped, rushing forward, but Jake held her back. "Careful," he said, pointing to the shallow trap. "We can help it, but slowly." Together, they freed the creature. It fluttered its small wings, looking at them with what Jake imagined as gratitude, then disappeared into the rocks. Lyra smiled faintly, a small glow in her eyes that had been dimmed by hunger and fear. Over the next few days, Jake and Lyra established a routine. They foraged together, shared what little food he had, and kept watch for threats. Slowly, the alien child regained strength, crawling more confidently, laughing softly at small wonders like stones that shimmered in the sunlight. Lyra's tears became less frequent, replaced by cautious smiles and quiet moments of laughter. Through these days, Jake observed something remarkable. Despite her weakened state, Lyra displayed ingenuity and intelligence. She knew which plants could be eaten raw, which water sources were safest, and how to move silently to avoid predators. Her people had survived through knowledge and adaptability, traits that reminded Jake of humanity in its most admirable form. He found himself learning from her, adapting his own strategies to this alien world. But danger was never far away. Raiders continued to patrol the outskirts, and each day brought uncertainty. Jake knew they could not hide forever. They would have to move, find better shelter, and perhaps confront the threat directly. Yet in those quiet moments, sharing food, water, and warmth, a bond formed, an unspoken agreement that they would protect each other, no matter the cost. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the jagged horizon, casting pale light across the rocks, Lyra approached Jake with the child in her arms. She extended her hands, offering a small, luminous crystal. It was a token of gratitude, fragile but beautiful, glowing softly in the dim light. Jake accepted it with a nod, understanding its meaning without words. It was trust. It was thanks. It was a promise that they were no longer alone. As they settled for the night, Jake felt a sense of purpose he had not known in years. Survival was no longer about himself alone. It was about them, all three of them, and the fragile hope that together they could endure whatever this planet threw at them. The wind howled outside, carrying the scent of dust and danger, but inside their small shelter, warmth and trust blossomed. For the first time since the crash, Jake allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could survive. And in that belief, he found a strength deeper than hunger, deeper than fear, a strength born of compassion, of shared humanity, and of the unbreakable bond forming between a human and an alien mother who had not eaten in days. The night stretched on, stars glimmering faintly above, and Jake kept watch. He knew the journey ahead would be long and dangerous, but he also knew that he was not alone. And sometimes, he realized, even in the harshest worlds, sharing a simple meal could change everything. The sun rose over the jagged horizon, painting the rocky landscape with pale orange and pink hues. Jake stirred from his uneasy sleep, careful not to wake Lyra or her child. He had grown accustomed to the alien's soft breathing and the faint glow of her skin in the dim light. Survival on this planet was no longer just about finding food and water. It was about keeping each other alive, about building trust in a place where danger waited around every corner. Lyra stirred, blinking at the light. Her child whimpered softly, still weak from days without proper food. Jake handed her a small portion of dried rations he had saved, breaking it into tiny pieces for the child. She ate slowly, her large eyes scanning the rocky terrain outside their shelter. There was a quiet alertness to her now, a sharpness that had returned despite her weakened body. The days of hunger and fear had left a mark, but they had not broken her spirit. Once they had eaten, Jake and Lyra stepped outside. He wanted to explore further, to find a more sustainable source of food and water. The land around them was harsh, steep cliffs, sharp rocks, and the occasional alien predator moving silently in the distance. But Lyra moved with a knowledge of the terrain that surprised him. She pointed out edible plants hidden among jagged stones, showed him shallow streams that were safe to drink from, and led him to tiny rock shelters that offered some protection from the wind. As they walked, Jake tried to communicate more. He spoke slowly, pointing to plants, to water, and to the child, using simple words and gestures. Lyra responded in kind, drawing symbols in the dust with her fingers, pointing to items and nodding. Their communication was slow, frustrating at times, but it worked. They learned to understand each other through actions, through careful observation, and through patience. One afternoon, while exploring a narrow canyon, they heard a distant mechanical hum. Jake froze, signaling Lyra to stay low. She pressed herself close to the rocks, her glowing skin dimming slightly, a sign of fear or caution. Jake peeked over the edge and saw it, raiders, the same group that had destroyed her settlement. They were riding small hover vehicles, scanning the canyon with glowing sensors. Their presence sent a chill down Jake's spine. He looked at Lyra. She did not panic. Instead, she gestured toward a narrow crevice in the canyon wall, one that he would have missed without her guidance. They crawled inside, pressing their bodies against the cold stone as the raiders passed by. The sound of engines and distant shouting echoed through the canyon, and Jake felt his heart pound. But he also felt a deep respect for Lyra's courage. Despite her weakness and hunger, she knew how to protect her child. She had survived this long, and she would continue to do so. When the raiders were gone, they emerged cautiously. Lyra took a deep breath and led Jake to a hidden pool of water she had discovered earlier. She knelt by the edge, dipping her hands into the clear liquid, offering some to Jake and then to her child. Water, he realized, was more precious than food in this world. Without it, survival was impossible. They drank slowly, savoring each sip, the tension of the encounter slowly easing. Over the next several days, Jake and Lyra continued their routine. They foraged, repaired small portions of his survival gear, and created a system for protecting themselves. Jake taught Lyra how to use his portable stove more efficiently, how to preserve food, and how to purify water. She listened intently, nodding and practicing each technique with careful precision. In return, she showed him secret routes through the rocky terrain, hiding spots, and even how to sense approaching danger from subtle shifts in the wind or the behavior of local animals. During these moments, Jake noticed something remarkable about Lyra. Despite everything she had endured, she was intelligent, resourceful, and courageous. She had been forced into survival, but she adapted, learning quickly from him and applying her own knowledge. Her child, too, began to recover, crawling more confidently and giggling softly at small wonders like luminescent rocks or the strange birds that flitted across the cliffs. But not all moments were safe. One afternoon, as they explored a ridge above their shelter, a group of predators appeared, large, sleek creatures with sharp claws and glowing eyes. They circled below, sniffing the air, aware of the newcomers. Jake motioned for Lyra to stay back and quickly fashioned a distraction using a flare from his pack. The creatures hesitated, confused by the sudden burst of light and sound. Lyra grabbed her child, moving silently to safety, while Jake used his knowledge of terrain to guide the predators away. By the time they returned, the creatures had disappeared, leaving Jake and Lyra both shaken but unharmed. After the encounter, they rested near a small rock overhang. Lyra held her child close, and for the first time she spoke words Jake could understand. "Humans strong," she said slowly, her voice still accented and broken. "Help hope." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of her trust. It was not just gratitude. It was a recognition that humanity, even in the form of one man, could make a difference in a world where survival seemed impossible. As the days passed, the bond between them grew stronger. Jake realized that this planet was teaching him more than survival skills. It was teaching him patience, empathy, and the importance of compassion. Lyra, too, seemed to change. Her initial wariness faded, replaced by cautious trust. She allowed Jake to hold her child, to prepare meals, and even to help with small tasks in the shelter. The glow of her skin, once dim and flickering, grew steadier, a sign of nourishment, safety, and slowly returning hope. One evening, as the twin moons rose and cast a pale light over the canyon, Jake and Lyra sat together near the edge of a cliff. The child slept in her lap, exhausted from the day's activities. Jake handed her a small piece of fruit he had found during their foraging. She accepted it, taking a bite and then offering the rest to him with a small, grateful smile. The gesture was simple, but it carried meaning. They were partners in survival now, learning from each other, protecting each other, and forming a bond that transcended species. But danger was never far away. The raiders remained a constant threat, their patrols growing more frequent and daring. Jake knew that hiding alone would not be enough. They would need to find a more secure location or confront the raiders directly. Lyra, sensing his thoughts, nodded silently. She was ready to fight for her child, for her people, and now, for this human who had shown her kindness in a world filled with cruelty. As the days turned into nights, Jake noticed changes in the alien colony he had only glimpsed before. Hidden in the valleys were others, survivors who had managed to avoid capture. They watched from a distance, cautious but curious. Lyra explained through gestures and broken words that her people had suffered greatly, forced to hide and often starving. But the presence of a human, someone willing to share, protect, and teach, was something new, something almost unimaginable. It brought hope. Jake felt a deep sense of responsibility. He was not just surviving for himself anymore. He was surviving for Lyra, for her child, and for the small spark of hope he could offer to her people. He began planning ways to secure food and water for the hidden survivors, to teach them techniques for protection, and to prepare for the day when they could finally reclaim some measure of safety on this planet. One morning, as he and Lyra ventured to a nearby ridge to scout the area, They discovered a cave system hidden behind a waterfall. The entrance was narrow, but inside, it opened into a large, dry chamber with natural formations that could provide shelter and storage. Jake's heart leapt. This could be the place where they could gather the survivors safely, away from raiders and predators. He shared his excitement with Lyra, who studied the cave carefully. She nodded slowly, approving the choice. It was a sign that she trusted his judgment, a trust that had grown through shared danger, compassion, and perseverance. Over the next few days, they worked to secure the cave. Jake taught Lyra how to create traps and alarms using simple materials, how to purify water stored inside, and how to ration food effectively. Lyra, in turn, taught Jake how to navigate the surrounding terrain safely, how to identify edible plants and minerals, and how to use subtle signs to detect approaching threats. Their skills complemented each other perfectly, and their bond grew stronger with every shared task. One evening, as they sat near a small fire inside the cave, Lyra spoke more words that Jake could understand. "You human different, not like others." She looked at him, her eyes wide and serious. "Kind, strong help." Jake smiled faintly, humbled. It was not praise he sought, but it mattered. In this harsh world, kindness and strength could mean the difference between life and death. He realized that humanity's true strength was not in weapons or technology alone, but in compassion, courage, and the willingness to stand for others. Night fell, and the cave was quiet except for the soft breathing of the child and the distant calls of alien creatures outside. Jake felt a mixture of exhaustion and fulfillment. He had come to this planet as a stranger, lost and alone, but he was no longer alone. Lyra and her child depended on him, and he, in turn, had come to depend on them, not just for survival but for hope. As he drifted to sleep, Jake thought about the challenges ahead. The raiders would not stop, the planet was unforgiving, and survival would never be easy. But for the first time, he felt a sense of purpose deeper than fear or hunger. He had found something worth fighting for, something worth protecting, and he knew that together, they could face whatever this harsh world threw at them. He glanced at Lyra, her glowing skin dimly illuminated by the firelight. She looked peaceful, her child resting against her chest, and for a moment the world outside seemed a little less dangerous. They had survived the storm, the hunger, the predators, and the raiders. They had formed a bond stronger than fear, stronger than desperation. And in that bond, Jake found a strength that no storm, no predator, and no hostile world could break. For now, survival was about more than just food and water. It was about trust, compassion, and courage. And as long as they had that, Jake knew they could endure anything. The days had grown longer, the nights colder, but the small family had adapted. Jake, Lyra, and her child had formed a routine that balanced survival with safety. The hidden cave provided shelter, a place to store food, and a vantage point to watch the surrounding valleys. Lyra had begun to trust him completely, allowing him to help care for her child, teaching him, and sharing moments of quiet laughter. Jake had grown stronger, too, not just physically but in purpose. Every action, every decision carried weight now. He was no longer alone. He was part of a fragile new family, and protecting them had become his reason to endure. One morning, as the pale twin suns rose over the jagged horizon, Jake noticed something unusual, tracks, deep and wide, leading toward the cave. He crouched and studied them carefully. Raiders. They had been clever, cautious, but they had finally discovered the family's new refuge. He gestured for Lyra to follow him quietly. Her eyes widened and she immediately understood. Without a word, they prepared. Inside the cave, Jake worked quickly, using his knowledge of the terrain and the resources he had gathered. He reinforced the entrance with rocks and rigged simple alarms from dangling stones that would create noise if disturbed. Lyra helped, her glowing hands moving with careful precision, placing small traps along hidden paths. Her child watched, fascinated but silent, sensing the tension in the air. They were preparing not just for survival, but for confrontation. As the hours passed, the wind carried distant mechanical sounds, the raiders, growing louder, approaching fast. Jake and Lyra crouched behind a natural wall within the cave, hearts pounding. They could hear the raiders' voices, harsh and alien, calling to each other as they scanned the terrain. The first few moments were filled with quiet fear, but then Jake took a deep breath. He looked at Lyra. "We can do this. We know this land. We can protect your people," he whispered. Lyra nodded, a small spark of determination lighting her eyes. The raiders arrived at the cave entrance. They paused, suspicious of the silence inside. One stepped forward carelessly, reaching toward the rocks Jake had reinforced. A loud clatter echoed as the traps were triggered, sending rocks tumbling and creating a loud, chaotic distraction. The raiders shouted, startled, and Jake saw his chance. He grabbed a small flare, aiming it toward the cliff edge. The sudden burst of light and smoke confused the raiders, giving Lyra the opportunity to pull her child further inside the cave. The battle was not with weapons, not yet, but with ingenuity. Jake used the terrain, the traps, and his understanding of alien behavior to create confusion and fear among the raiders. Lyra, though exhausted, moved with precision, guiding her child and reinforcing safe positions. The raiders tried to adapt, but the humans' combination of quick thinking and courage gave them the advantage. Finally, the raiders, frustrated and outmaneuvered, retreated. Their hover vehicles lifted off, engines whining, leaving behind dust and the faint smell of burnt machinery. Jake exhaled deeply, his muscles trembling with exhaustion and relief. Lyra's tears flowed freely, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and triumph. She hugged her child tightly, then looked at Jake. "You saved us," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Jake shook his head. "We saved each other. And we'll keep doing it." The bond between them had deepened beyond trust. It had become mutual respect, even something resembling family. This was more than survival, it was hope, and hope was powerful. The next days were spent securing the area. Jake and Lyra led the hidden survivors from the surrounding valleys to the safety of the cave. Each one arrived cautiously, unsure of the human's intentions, but when they saw Lyra standing beside him, glowing with health and confidence, their fear eased. Slowly, the community grew, small but determined. They shared food, knowledge, and protection, learning from Jake's methods while contributing their own wisdom. Jake discovered that the alien colony had unique talents that could be used for survival and defense. Some could move silently, others could sense vibrations in the ground from afar. Combining these abilities with human ingenuity created a strategy that allowed them to forage, hunt, and protect themselves more effectively than ever before. Jake felt a swell of pride, not in himself, but in what humanity could achieve when paired with courage and cooperation. Lyra, too, found a renewed sense of purpose. No longer simply a mother struggling to survive, she became a leader, guiding her people and teaching them the techniques Jake had shared. The child thrived, growing stronger each day, laughter and curiosity returning to their eyes. The sight of the family united, thriving, gave Jake a profound sense of fulfillment. Humanity's strength, he realized, was not just in survival instincts but in compassion, courage, and the ability to inspire hope in others. One evening, as the twin moons rose and bathed the cave in soft, silver light, Lyra approached Jake. She extended her hands, placing them on his shoulders. Her eyes, luminous and wide, reflected gratitude deeper than words could express. "You, human, different," she said softly. "Kind, strong, saved us all." Jake nodded, humbled. He had not come to this planet seeking recognition, but her words carried weight. They represented trust, respect, and a bond that transcended species. Days turned into weeks. The hidden colony began to thrive. Small gardens of alien plants flourished near the cave entrance. Water was purified and stored efficiently. and the survivors learned to defend themselves with strategies combining alien intuition and human ingenuity. Raiders became wary, sensing that this small group was no longer easy prey. Jake and Lyra had transformed fear and desperation into resilience and strength, yet challenges continued. One day, while exploring a nearby canyon, Jake noticed signs of another raider group approaching. This time they were larger, more aggressive, and better armed. He returned to the cave and quickly devised a plan, consulting Lyra through gestures and shared maps drawn in the dust. Their teamwork was seamless, born of weeks of trust, observation, and survival experience. When the raiders arrived, they were met with a coordinated defense. Alarms rang, traps were triggered, and the alien survivors, guided by Jake and Lyra, moved with surprising precision. The raiders struggled to adapt to the humans' clever tactics and the aliens' keen senses. Rocks tumbled from the cliffs, smoke obscured vision, and the terrain itself seemed to work against the intruders. Finally, after a tense struggle, the raiders retreated. Exhausted but victorious, Jake and Lyra stood together, holding hands as they watched the distant hover vehicles disappear. Lyra's child ran to them, laughing for the first time in days, and she knelt to embrace them both. Her tears flowed freely, not from fear or hunger but from relief and gratitude. She had witnessed compassion, courage, and ingenuity, not just survival skills but the heart of humanity in action. In the quiet aftermath, Jake realized something profound. Humanity's greatest strength was not technology or weapons. It was the ability to care, to protect, and to inspire hope in others. Through simple acts, sharing food, protecting the weak, and teaching others, he had made a difference. He had saved not just a mother and her child, but an entire community, and in doing so, he had proven the core of humanity, courage born from compassion. Lyra approached him once more, her voice soft but firm. "You, human special, our people will remember. You saved everything." Jake smiled faintly, humbled. He had not sought recognition, only survival and a chance to help. Yet the gratitude in her eyes, the trust of her child, and the renewed hope of the colony were reward enough. The months passed. The hidden colony grew stronger, and their understanding of the planet deepened. Jake and Lyra continued to teach, protect, and explore. Their bond was unbreakable, forged through shared danger, trust, and survival. The child thrived, learning from both human and alien, a living symbol of hope and the power of cooperation across worlds. One evening, as they sat near a fire inside the cave, Lyra held her child close and looked at Jake. "You gave us life," she whispered. "Not just food. Not just safety. Hope." Jake nodded, understanding the depth of her words. He had arrived on this harsh planet as a stranger, lost and alone, but he had become something more, a protector, a teacher, and a friend. He had shared his strength, and in doing so had been reminded of the best qualities of humanity: courage, compassion, and resilience. The twin moons rose high, casting a silver glow over the cave and the surrounding cliffs. Jake felt a profound sense of peace. The storms, the predators, the raiders, they were threats still, but they no longer ruled their lives. They had created a sanctuary, a home, and a community. They had survived not just by strength alone, but through trust, ingenuity, and the simple, powerful act of sharing. As he watched Lyra and her child, Jake realized that this was what made humans special. It was not the ability to fight or endure alone. It was the ability to reach out, to share what little they had, and to inspire hope in the darkest moments. He smiled faintly, a quiet promise forming in his heart. Whatever challenges came next, they would face them together, and no force, no matter how cruel, could break the bond they had forged. The story of survival, compassion, and courage on this harsh alien world was only beginning, but one thing was certain. Humanity's strength shone brightest in moments like these, when hope was shared, trust was earned, and the act of giving, even something as simple as food, could change everything.